The barren landscape of Ramgar stretched endlessly, a desolate moon orbiting a forgotten planet on the far edge of human space. The sky, tinged with a pale blue hue, shimmered with the light of distant stars, but no warmth reached the ground. Jagged rocks and deep craters littered the surface, broken only by the remnants of military outposts scattered across the terrain, most of them long abandoned. Amid this emptiness, a single remaining outpost stood vigilant, housing the battalion of Gurkhas stationed there. Inside the fortified outpost, Captain Rai moved silently among his men. Though his face remained hidden beneath his helmet, his presence commanded attention. Rai was a man of few words, but his reputation was legendary. Battle-hardened and unflinching, he had seen more than his share of warfare on Earth and beyond. The Gurkhas, known for their loyalty, endurance, and unparalleled combat skills, trusted him without question. The moon had been quiet for months. Too quiet. The Gurkhas had been stationed here for routine surveillance, tasked with ensuring the area remained secure. Reinforcements were overdue, but none of the men had raised concerns. They were used to operating on their own, cut off from central command. Still, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Something felt wrong. The low hum of seismic monitors filled the command room. Rai stood over a holographic map of the region, the terrain displayed in sharp detail. Beside him, Sergeant Basnet, his second-in-command, frowned at the screen. "Another tremor, sir," Basnet said, his voice clipped but calm. "That's the third one this week. Stronger this time." Rai's eyes narrowed beneath his visor. The tremors had started a month ago, slight vibrations at first, easily dismissed. But they had grown in intensity, enough to stir a sense of unease among the battalion. Ramgar wasn't supposed to be geologically active. Something else was causing the disturbances. "Send a reconnaissance team," Rai ordered, his voice a low rumble. "We'll check the source ourselves." Within minutes, a small team of Gurkhas, including Corporal Tapa and Private Rana, was assembled and ready to move. The men moved with practiced efficiency, their kukuris sheathed at their sides, rifles strapped across their backs. They knew how to operate in silence, their movements smooth and calculated. Ramgar's low gravity made their steps light, allowing them to glide over the rocky terrain as they descended into the valley where the seismic activity had been most concentrated. As the team neared the coordinates, a sharp crack echoed through the air. The ground beneath them trembled violently. Tapa, the point man, dropped to one knee, signaling for the others to halt. A deep fissure split the ground ahead, stretching out like a wound in the earth. "This wasn't here before," Tapa muttered, eyes scanning the opening. "It's new." Rai, observing from a distance through his visor's feed, felt a tightening in his chest. "Proceed with caution," he ordered. Tapa and his men moved closer, rifles raised. What they saw within the fissure was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Strange, angular structures jutted from beneath the surface, their dark, metallic sheen reflecting the moon's faint light. Tendrils of vapor hissed out from between the cracks in the alien material, giving the impression of something ancient and alive. "Sir," Basnet's voice crackled through the comms. "We're picking up a signal. It's not human." Before Rai could respond, the fissure erupted. A deafening roar shook the valley as massive, biomechanical creatures emerged from the depths. Towering over the men, the Vashur stood on two legs, their bodies a twisted fusion of metal and organic matter. Their eyes glowed a piercing blue, and the sound of their mechanical movements reverberated through the air. "Contact!" Tapa shouted, firing the first shot. The bullets ricocheted off the creature's armor, useless against its dense, alien shell. "Fall back!" Rai barked into the comms, his voice sharper now. The Gurkhas quickly retreated, moving with the precision of seasoned soldiers. But the Vashur were faster than expected. One of the creatures lunged forward, its clawed hand slamming into the ground where Tapa had stood moments before. The team managed to regroup behind a ridge, the towering Vashur looming over them from a distance, but they were not out of danger yet. One of the creatures emitted a high-pitched screech, and within seconds a swarm of smaller, drone-like machines burst from the fissure, their eyes glowing with the same eerie blue light. "They're not just soldiers," Rai muttered to himself. "They're an army." Back at the outpost, Rai's mind raced. These creatures had been lying dormant beneath the surface, waiting for something. Perhaps the seismic activity itself had awoken them. But it wasn't just the emergence of the Vashur that troubled him. It was what they represented. If the Vashur were using Ramgar as a staging ground, they could launch an invasion that would reach far beyond this moon. "Sergeant Basnet," Rai called out, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging in his mind. "Prepare the men. We're going to war." Basnet nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "No reinforcements, sir. We're alone." Rai's reply was immediate. "Then we'll fight alone." As the Gurkhas braced for the inevitable confrontation, Rai stood at the forefront, watching as the alien army gathered strength in the distance. His men, vastly outnumbered, were facing an enemy beyond anything they had trained for. But if there was one thing Rai knew, it was that the Gurkhas didn't back down. "Hold your ground," Rai said calmly, gripping his rifle. "This moon is ours." The ground trembled once more, as if in agreement, and the Vashur army began to march. The barren plains of Ramgar had become a battleground, its craggy surface scarred by explosions and the remains of Vashur machines. The Gurkhas, led by Captain Rai, had been fighting for survival for days, using the moon's harsh environment to their advantage. They were vastly outnumbered, their enemies relentless, but the Gurkhas were not known for retreating. They moved like shadows across the rocky terrain, exploiting every crevice, crater, and ridge to launch their attacks and then vanish before the Vashur could mount a response. Sergeant Basnet, a lean, sharp-eyed veteran, crouched behind a jagged rock formation, peering through the scope of his rifle. "Another patrol. They're scanning the area. We'll need to move quickly," he whispered into his comm. The Vashur drones, floating ominously above the ground, hummed as they passed overhead, their glowing blue optics searching for human heat signatures. Rai's calm voice crackled through the earpiece. "Let them pass, Basnet. We got a bigger target. The supply convoy is moving towards the northern ridge. We hit them hard there." The Gurkhas had learned quickly that the Vashur relied heavily on their machines for ground operations, transporting vital resources between their underground command center and forward outposts. Disrupting these convoys had become Rai's priority. Starve the enemy, weaken their forces, and stretch them thin. It was classic guerrilla warfare, something the Gurkhas had mastered long before humanity ever set foot on distant moons. The squad moved swiftly, hugging the ground as they ascended a narrow path along a jagged cliffside. Ramgar's low gravity allowed them to leap across gaps and climb near vertical surfaces with ease. Their movements fluid and silent. Every step was deliberate, every glance measured. For the Gurkhas, war was a deadly game of patience and precision. At the top of the ridge, Rai surveyed the landscape below. Through his visor, he saw the Vashur convoy, a column of massive biomechanical walkers flanked by smaller drones, moving steadily across the valley floor. Their glowing exteriors pulse and sync, a stark contrast to the cold, gray rocks surrounding them. Rai's fingers tightened around his rifle. "This is it," he said quietly. "Basnet, take the first shot. After that, we hit them with everything we've got." Basnet nodded and took position. He exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steady, and fired. The crack of the rifle echoed off the cliffs, followed by the hiss of plasma slicing through the air. The shot struck one of the walkers square in the sensor array, its optics flashing violently before it collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. "Engage," Rai ordered. The Gurkhas opened fire in unison, their concentrated barrage cutting through the Vashur convoy. Explosions erupted as the convoy's defenses tried to respond, but the Gurkhas had already moved from their positions, scattering along the cliffs and disappearing into the rocks. They were ghosts, attacking from all sides before vanishing again. Corporal Tapa ducked behind a boulder, narrowly avoiding a burst of energy fire from one of the Vashur drones. He rolled to his feet, unsheathing his kukuri, and dashed forward in a blur of motion. The drone whirred, attempting to track his movement, but Tapa was too fast. He closed the distance and slashed through the drone's exposed circuitry with a single, fluid strike. The machine sparked and fell to the ground lifeless. More drones swarmed into the valley, but the Gurkhas were already moving, slipping through narrow passageways in the rocks, emerging in unexpected locations to strike with deadly precision. Rai's plan was working. The Vashur forces were disoriented, unable to pin down the elusive humans. But victory was never certain. As the Gurkhas regrouped near a cave entrance, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. Rai's instincts flared. Something was wrong. From the far end of the valley, a massive, quadrupedal war machine appeared, its towering frame dwarfing the smaller walkers. Its body hummed with alien energy, and its weapons glowed with ominous light. Rai's jaw clenched. Fall back. Now! The Gurkhas broke into a full sprint, darting towards a cave system they had scouted earlier. The war machine's cannons roared to life, blasting craters into the ground where they had just stood. Rocks and debris flew in all directions, but the Gurkhas moved with practiced discipline, dodging between explosions and slipping into the safety of the cave's narrow tunnels. Inside, the men took a moment to catch their breath. Basnet wiped sweat from his brow and shook his head. That thing's a fortress on legs. We can't take it down with what we have. We don't need to, Rai replied, his voice steady despite the growing tension. We'll outlast it. These machines, whatever they are, they need something to control them. And we're going to find that something. Tapa, still gripping his bloodied kukuri, stepped forward. You think it's underground, sir? Rai nodded. It has to be. The Vashur command network, it's not just machines. There's a biological element. We've seen the patterns. They're too synchronized, too reliant on coordination. If we take out their command center, the rest will fall. The men exchanged glances. It was a dangerous plan, perhaps even suicidal, but they had no other option. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely cut off from reinforcements. But if they could strike at the heart of the Vashur, they could cripple their enemy before the invasion spread beyond Ramgar. We'll strike tonight, Rai said, determination etched in his voice. We go underground, find their command network, and destroy it. The men nodded, their resolve unshaken. They had faced impossible odds before. They would do it again. As the moon's pale light filtered into the cave, Rai stood at the mouth of the tunnel, looking out over the desolate landscape. The Vashur war machine still prowled in the distance, but its size and power no longer intimidated him. He knew that every war had a weakness, and he intended to find it. Prepare the explosives, he ordered. We're going into the heart of the beast. The subterranean tunnels beneath Ramgar were eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic sound of the Gurkhas' boots as they moved deeper into the darkness. Captain Rai led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow, every jagged rock formation. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on his shoulders. This was their last chance. Behind him, Sergeant Basnet, Corporal Tapa, and a handful of the remaining Gurkhas followed, their faces hardened with resolve. The air was thick with tension, the stale scent of ancient earth and metal filling their lungs. They had been navigating the caves for hours, moving closer to the Vashur command network, hidden somewhere deep beneath the moon's surface. According to their readings, this was the heart of the alien invasion, a biological nexus that coordinated the movements of the Vashur's biomechanical army. Destroying it would cripple their forces, leaving them vulnerable. But first, they had to find it. Rai signaled for the team to stop as they reached a fork in the tunnel. The path ahead split into two directions, both leading into a maze of winding passageways. Rai crouched down, studying the holographic map on his wrist display, while Basnet peered into the darkness. We're getting close, Rai whispered. The readings are stronger now. Their command center should be just ahead. Tapa, standing at Rai's side, glanced warily down the left tunnel. It's too quiet, sir. They know we're coming. Rai nodded grimly. They'll be waiting for us. But we've got no choice. We hit them hard, fast, and get out before they have a chance to react. The team moved again, their pace quickening as the tunnel sloped downward. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, tinged with the smell of something organic, something alive. The rock walls began to shimmer with an eerie blue glow, pulsating faintly like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Rai raised his fist, halting the team as they took in the sight before them. At the center of the chamber stood the Vashur Command Nexus, a massive, pulsating structure that seemed to be a grotesque blend of machinery and flesh. Its walls throbbed with energy, veins of bioluminescent light running through its metallic surface. The air hummed with the sound of alien machinery, and the ground vibrated underfoot. Basnet swore under his breath. That's it, Rai confirmed. We plant the charges around the base, collapse the entire structure. That'll shut down their entire network. But as the Gurkhas moved into position, a deep, resonant hum echoed through the chamber. The ground trembled, and from the shadows, a horde of Vashur drones emerged. Their glowing blue eyes locked onto the Gurkhas, and without warning they charged. Hold your ground, Rai shouted, raising his rifle and opening fire. The Gurkhas sprang into action, their disciplined movements precise and deadly. Plasma rounds tore through the air, striking the drones and sending them crashing to the ground. But more kept coming, swarming from every direction. Tapa, wielding his Kakuri with lethal grace, sliced through a drone's armor, its mechanical limbs sparking as it fell. We're getting overrun, sir. Rai ducked behind a boulder, firing in controlled bursts. Basnet, the charges. Basnet nodded and sprinted towards the base of the command nexus, dodging incoming fire from the drones. He planted the explosives with swift efficiency, his fingers moving in practiced motions. Charges, said Captain. We just need a clear exit. But the Vashur had anticipated this. From the far side of the chamber, a massive Vashur warlord emerged, a towering figure of biomechanical terror, its armor thick and impenetrable. It roared, the sound reverberating through the chamber, and charged at the Gurkhas with terrifying speed. Rai's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the final test of their resolve. Focus fire on the warlord. Bring it down. The Gurkhas unleashed a hail of bullets and plasma at the warlord, but its armor absorbed the blows, barely slowing its advance. It swung a massive arm, sending debris and drones flying as it charged toward Rai's position. Time seemed to slow. Rai knew they couldn't hold the warlord back forever. If it reached them, it would crush them without a second thought. They needed to detonate the charges, and they needed to do it now. Basnet, get ready, Rai shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Basnet's hand hovered over the detonator, his eyes locked on Rai. Captain, we won't make it out in time if I blow it now. Rai's mind raced. The warlord was closing in, and the drones continued to pour into the chamber. There was no way out, no way to escape, but there was a way to win. Detonate the charges, Sergeant, Rai said calmly. Basnet's eyes widened in disbelief. Sir, do it, Rai barked, his voice filled with the authority of a man who had made his choice. Basnet hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded grimly. It's been an honor, Captain. With a final glance at the approaching warlord, Basnet pressed the detonator. The charges exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The walls of the nexus crumbled, and the entire structure began to collapse in on itself. The ground buckled beneath the Gurkhas as they fought to maintain their footing. The warlord, caught in the blast, let out a deafening roar before it was consumed by the collapsing debris. The drones faltered, their movements erratic as the command network disintegrated, and one by one, they fell lifeless to the ground. Rai stood amidst the destruction, his breath heavy, his body bruised and battered. Around him, the last of the Gurkhas regrouped, their faces etched with exhaustion, but filled with a quiet sense of victory. They had done it. As the dust settled, Rai looked out over the wreckage of the Vashur command center. The war was far from over, but they had struck a devastating blow. For now, Ramgar was safe. He turned to his men, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Let's go home." And with that, they began the long ascent back to the surface, leaving behind the ruins of an alien invasion that would never come to pass.